for whatever reason, I'm thinking about jobs a lot. And I am 10 plus years, like 11, 12 years into my career. And I've been lucky to work with many high caliber companies. And but I know from working with many, many different people in various walks of life that my story isn't really representative of finding jobs. So, but the thing is, I'm at a hire at will kind of a company. So when they decide to let me go, I'm a goner, and people always think these kind of things don't happen to me until it does, right? So, and I did actually experience that. I was sacked before. I was fired before, and it really comes out of the blue. Again, I always thought this was a thing that happens to other people, but it happens to me. And but at the time, I wanted to look for a new job, and I remember how difficult it was to try to find a new job, and especially in the current job climate, I know that it is also very difficult for the majority of people in finding a job. So I always say things may be difficult, but there are always things you can do, right? So in this market, in this economy, as you are looking for your job, and if you're a young person, as you are looking for your first job, what are some things to keep in mind so that you can be in one piece and be okay? So I'm gonna start from a very idealistic angle. So ideally, right, you should be able to have a job that gives you a very kind of a sustainable life, right? Your job and your income should be enough to give you lodging, somewhere you can rent. It should give you enough money so you can feed yourself. It should give you enough money so you can, enjoy some of the things that give you joy in your life. So, a job should fill all those criteria. But cost of living is a factor. Inflation is a factor. Also, people not wanting to give you a lot of money for the same amount of labor is an issue. Which I talk about this many different times whenever I talk about a job. But suppose when you are looking for a job, right? If you're gonna do the same kind of work, would you prefer to be paid more or paid less? Obviously, if it's for the same amount of work, you want to be paid more. Now, but suppose you had a business and you had to hire someone for the same amount of work. Would you appreciate a worker who who demands more pay or less pay? As an employer, you are going to love someone who makes less pay, right? So there's this innate paradox when it comes to job searching. One person is looking for minimum payment, one person is looking for maximum payment. So with this, along with other market and macroeconomic factors, we are often finding ourselves in a time where we can't really sustain ourselves with one job. And so, if you are in a market that's hyper saturated, and if you are living in a metropolitan area that is also very saturated, right? Your expenses and is not going to be really covered by the money that you are making. So people take on multiple jobs to compensate for this. But I think, but also I know deep down you also think one job should be enough to do all those things, right? So, you understand that when there's different options in living, cost of living, I could rent a studio apartment with my wife and 2 dogs. It's possible. It won't be comfortable, but it's still possible. I could rent 1 bedroom. I could rent 2 bedrooms. I could rent 3 bedrooms. I could buy a house. So I know that I have options, but at the same time, the bare minimum necessities should be covered by a job, right? Moreover, if you don't have an able body, if you have conditions that make you unemployable, not because of your voluntary choice, but because of something innate within you, then society should have enough of a safety net so that you can also be covered living in the world, right? So these are the things that we have to keep in mind when we go out and vote, when we pick our elected officials who are going to make influences on these types of things that actually have an impact on our lives. These are the things that we have to be looking out for when we are living in a democratic society. So, with that, number one, it is a kind of in general, the market doesn't want to pay you more. In general, the cost of living is very high. So, given this unfair kind of a situation, what should you think? Well, how can you think that in a way that minimizes your suffering? First of all, I think, like I said, right? There's levels. There's multiple levels in the same kind of a thing. You could have a toilet that's just basically a hole in the ground, like many Korean traditional homes. It's just a hole, and you squat and poop and pee. Or you could get like a ceramic cover for that hole. Or you could have a basic toilet. Or you could have a toilet that has like, dedicated buttons for like pee and poo. Or you could get a bidet. Or you could get the fancy like Japanese seat warmers, right? So you always have choices. When we are looking for our first job and when we are having difficulties finding a job, it's important to lower our standards of expectations about our quality of living. So many people, when faced with this, they feel really bad, right? Because it means life is usually like, oh, it's gonna be really uncomfortable and I have to live in squalor, and it feels bad, right? But that's also representative how society trains your eyes and trains your perspective to see the poor. When you don't have money, it's just that you don't have any money. But because of how we are trained to see the less, fortunate in terms of money, we think they're losers in life. They have no skill, and they're generally like failures of human beings, and therefore they deserve to be homeless and things like that. This is the predominant voice, right? Like we always see homeless people as by default dangerous and lazy and things like that. But when you actually sit down and talk with the homeless person, which not a lot of people do, it's a lot of different cascading effects that are beyond one person's power that makes that person lose any type of hope to work on themselves, right? So there's a big difference between letting go of everything that you like, any kind of hope and any kind of standard of living, and just going out and just relinquishing everything. That's kind of how monks live, and there's a lot of freedom in that. But there is that, but also you holding on to your hopes and working on starting at the base minimum and working your way more or less up. So, if you are having a difficult time finding a job, when you really, really lower your expectations and you think that you are, associate level, then when you apply to internships because you lower your expectations, guess what? You're going to be very overqualified. Of course, you start at a lower rank. But the nice thing is, guess who's going to be the number one intern? Probably you, because you're overqualified for that job, right? So that means every time you go to work, the pay might not reflect your excellent qualities, but you are going to be so overperforming in that role. Now, when you're about to leave because your contract expires or something, you're going to leave a very big hole. And when this is coupled with taking ownership of your job, right? Which is, again, many times misinterpreted, right? It's seen as abusive for the laborer to have some kind of a ownership kind of a mentality, because why should they? They're just workers, right? And so if you want if you want your employees to be owners, then give them ownership. This is the foundation of how I forget the specific term for it, but basically a collective business, right? Where all the employees have like a certain amount of stake in the business. So while that is also an option, what really helps you is when you take ownership for this job and you pretend it's yours. Why it's good is I'm not really asking you to be taken advantage of by your employer. What I'm really calling out for is there's a very big difference between you participating in just the area of your job versus you opening your eyes to more experience. And so you could be an intern at a company and you could just clock in and clock out. That is an option. I'm not saying that's bad. But if you're gonna be in that field, right, it definitely helps you to look at all the things and operations and functions and the personnel and the business operation that makes this internship work, right? And the more contextual knowledge like that you have, when you switch jobs and when you interview for different places, again, you're just going to keep building upon the building block that you had as the most overqualified intern. Now, it's the same associate position, but you're going to be the cream of the crop in associates. And then the next time, you're going to be the cream of the crop in senior. And next time, you're going to be cream of the crop in staff. And that is how you really, really, really cement your place in the workplace. And employment and jobs and opportunities have a lot to do with networking. This is an unfortunate reality for introverts, but it actually is really influenced by networks. You wouldn't believe how in the industry, like one email could, from a person you know, could work many, many wonders in recruiting, right? So, if all the future, resources and glowing reviews could be part of your arsenal, and the only cost is just you lowering your expectation, that's a pretty good way to look at things, especially if you are set on the field. Now, but the thing is, you might not be really deeply invested into one field where you're like, I want to learn everything about this job because eventually I want to start my own business related to this, right? So not everybody needs to live like that. But, so if you are, just looking to clock in and clock out, then, again, the expectation that really helps is that you're not really looking to be the star. Because when you are a star, and when you are trying to look for a position where you're massively celebrated, and this is the opposite side, right, of the scenario that I was just talking about. Suppose you know you're an associate level, but you try to go for a senior job, right? And then you get it, right? Okay, like either you don't get it because you're underqualified, or you get it because turns out you are qualified and you just didn't know it, or you luck out because all the other candidates pulled out or whatever, right? But guess what happens in the world of professional life when something like this happens? Imposter syndrome. It starts kicking in. And you feel like you're not good enough for this job. Every day of work you show up. One-on-ones, you're gonna find yourself defensive and like, you're like, at every performance review, you're gonna find yourself so stressed out because you care so much about whether you make the cut or not. And that kind of life, right? It may give you more money in the short term. It may give you more, lines in the resume, and it may make you ahead of the resume race. But at what cost? Why do we live? Why do we have jobs? We don't live for the purpose of making money. We don't live for the purpose of employment, right? We live for no point, but if we're gonna be alive anyway, might as well enjoy it, right? We want to aim for a certain level of joy and lack of suffering in our lives. So, but the blind pursuit of joy and excitement will lead to suffering. But what I'm saying is, if you're gonna be alive, it helps to not suffer, right? So, if money isn't this massive point, if money isn't this thing that you're going to carry yourself into the afterlife, you're going to leave it all behind. Also, you were born with no money. So, if money is something that you just fleetingly have access to, then isn't it better? If you are going to be the type of person who would stress out from this, wouldn't it be better to prioritize on the lack of suffering? But at the same time, I understand that some people naturally have a very high stress tolerance, and they're like, like, I thought I was an associate, but then, hey, I'm a senior, so, hey, guess what? Like, what are you going to do? Fire me? Okay, then fire me. I still got the job, and I can still have the resume. So if you have that deep level of self-confidence and self-assurance, then you can do whatever you want, right? But if you are finding yourself timid, if you are finding yourself nervous, if you're finding yourself anxious before interviews and when you're looking for jobs and when you're submitting resumes, if you're feeling a lot of stress, you may have too much of a high expectation of yourself. And that is where I would invite you to lower your expectations, because short-term money is never worth the short-term crazy amount of stress and suffering. Hope this helps, and if you have more specific questions about jobs and job searching and career advice in general, let me know in the comments and I can answer to the best of my abilities.